Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pope Francis Generation. Hey, Paul, and welcome back to Liz Hansen. She's been with us before and back again. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for asking me back. I guess I didn't bomb too badly last time.
Paul, what's the topic for today?
Yeah, so today we're talking about an article that Liz recently published in Dappled Things magazine about it's about lots of different things, but the theme we're going to focus on specifically is what it means to feel safe or unsafe in the church.
I think for a lot of people who follow this show, it's a question we have. I'm really curious to see where this goes. You two have a lot of experience that I'm looking forward to listening to. So, friends, hello and welcome to Pope Francis Generation. It's the show for Catholics struggling with the church's teaching, who feel like they might not belong in the church anymore, and who still hunger for a God of love and goodness.
Your hosts are me, Paul Fahey, a professional catechist.
And I'm Dominic, someone who needs catechesis. Together, we're taking our own look at the Catholic Church, her teachings and practices from three views that changed our world.
And those are the Kerygma, the Doctrine of Theosis, and the teachings of Pope Francis.
Together with you, we're the Pope Francis Generation.
Yeah. So I want to introduce Liz again. Her bio has expanded a little bit in the past few months. So Elizabeth Hansen graduated from Franciscan University of Steubenville in 2008 with majors in English and Theology. She and her husband Luke met at the university's honors Great Books program, and they raised 4 kids in Michigan. Her writing has appeared in Magnificat, Columbia Magazine, Plough, Crux Now, National Catholic Register, Femme Catholic, and Dappled Things magazine. Liz, thanks for coming back.
Thank you. Good to talk to you again.
Yes, and you absolutely didn't bomb the last time. That was I heard really good feedback about our conversation the last time, and so that was about to remind listeners. That one was about Liz had written an article based on her own experience, reflecting on her own experience at Steubenville about the still ongoing abuse scandal that's happening in Steubenville at Franciscan University. We're not talking about that again, even though that still is ongoing.
It's still,
it's
still a thing.
It's unfortunately not relevant. But Jen Morrison, if you follow her, she's still reporting on that. But today we wanted to talk about something different, something related, but a little bit different. So Liz just published an article, like I said, in Dappled Things, a quarterly magazine titled Desire of the Everlasting Hills. And hopefully by the time this podcast is published, that'll be available online. Mm-hmm. If not, it will be available very soon. Anyways, in that article, Liz, you recounted a family vacation you made a couple of years ago in the summer of 2021 that turned into a type of retreat or pilgrimage for you as you processed experiencing a season of scandal in the church broadly, but also within your local communities. The article was beautiful. I read it during my morning prayer after you had given it to me, and not expecting at all to cry through the whole thing. It was fantastic. You had given it to me. You had our family over for dinner, and we brought enchiladas, and it was a wild time. But the kids let us talk enough. We talked about some of the difficulties of being Catholic right now in the wake of all the sexual and spiritual abuse in the church and all the covering up that the church is doing. And I asked, how do you navigate still being Catholic, knowing all of that? And you handed me this article. So it was fantastic. It was beautiful. So yeah, I want to start. Can you tell us more about the article and why and how you wrote it? And
Yeah. Thank you for saying all that. It was good timing. I don't usually hand people things. I'm like, here's what I've written about like why I still remain Catholic, but it was right there. And I guess I had the answer. But I guess I wrote this essay pretty much over the course of a year. As I continued to process, like you said, both broad scandal, in particular scandal within local church communities, whether it's your own parish or the Catholic university that formed you, or the universal church as a whole, and seeing how this human nature corrupts everything in every aspect at every level of the church. And so in particular, I guess I started this trip in 2021. We live in Michigan, like you. We drove out west to New Mexico and to Colorado. And I remember emailing our school principal at the time and thinking that we would need to pull our kids out early in order to make the timing work. And he said something that I thought was kind of weird. And he was like, enjoy this time of pilgrimage. And I was like, well, that's kind of an odd thing to say. Like, it's a family vacation, and it just glanced off of me. But as we were just kind of letting our routines of home and things that we'd experienced at home go, and immerse ourselves in beautiful places in nature instead, I started realizing like there was something to that, and that this journey had started to become a pilgrimage of sorts, and a place of like a pilgrimage of healing. Like, how people might go to Lourdes or to some other site in order to pray and to be near places that thousands of people have gone to before, with their own intentions. Like I started realizing that there were parallels to that and to what I was looking for in these beautiful places. So we come back, and I realized like I'm still going to Mass. I don't know why, but something is still pulling me here in the liturgy. And I think it's connected to the same impulse I felt when I'm drawn to the mountains, when I'm drawn to beautiful places, and so I was trying to explore, what is that? And are they the same thing? Why do we need to stay in the church if we can just find God, in beautiful places in creation, or in people, like in having people like your family over? So I think I was also trying to distill for myself, well, why do I keep coming back to Mass and to this church when I can find God elsewhere? Is there something more that Mass and that Christ present in the church itself gives me that these other examples can't? So yeah, that was what the kind of questions I was trying to wrestle with.
There was one of the many great moments in the article you were talking about, at the different churches in Europe that you've seen, and all of this stuff. And then you said, and I'll quote it, the mountains, canyons, rolling Kansas prairies, and Colorado night sky, floodlit by the full moon, were heralds of God's existence no more and no less than Bernini's imposing saints above St. Peter's Square. But God, they seem gentler. In this sense of like, there's something about encountering God in nature that is more gentle than encountering God in these great traditional structures and artwork in the church. Mm-hmm. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I guess, should I go back maybe and explain what we were like literally like kind of driving away from?
Yeah.
So this started off, I guess, spring 2021. So we've had a year of COVID and all of the drama that ensued. And I think when we look back, like a lot, like, I don't think anyone likes to remember that year. But I think, at the time we recognized that these fault lines that were, splitting up society in our neighborhoods and our communities were in our pews too. And being very uneasy with that, but trying to cling to the people around us anyways, in spite of that. And trying to believe that like, well, our communion here is stronger than that. Like we have to persevere. And then there was an instance where it just felt like that was, I know that was futile. Like we ended up, how should I phrase this? I think in the article, I describe it as like we were caught up in an instance of like public derision, where, all the choices that people made during, 2020, early 2021, are kind of lifted up into, I don't know, like an indicator of what kind of person you are. Like if you made this choice, it's not just that, oh, that's a prudential judgment or a choice my family wouldn't have made, but it's because you're wicked, or you don't care about your family. You're, people who believe this are subhuman and they deserve to be mocked. It was that ugly.
And you're talking about prudential things with the pandemic, like masks or vaccines or distancing,
sure,
or those types
sure,
of things.
or like all these things that were, on the, top of everyone's mind, and we're all trying to navigate and use our best judgment. In an instance like that, where all of a sudden it wasn't just like, oh, we disagree, but we love you anyways. It was, no, you are so wrong. Why are you even here? In our community. And that was just like devastating to us, not only to be so caught off guard within the context of a church community that we were trying to hold on to, but also not knowing like who else agrees, like who else who we believe are our friends and welcome into our home, think about us in that way too. And I tried to be very intentional in not saying like what the issue was, because I think everyone, no matter like what choices they made, they all probably felt something similar that year, and feeling like at the receiving end of a sweeping judgment, over whether you're a moral person or not, whether you were deserving of being heard or not. I think that was, I don't know, something we all experienced to some extent during the pandemic.
But it takes on a different kind of flavor or a different kind of hurt when it's being framed in moral terms, in terms of belonging in the church, and when it's coming from our local communities of people who we know and people who we care about and people who we thought cared about us.
Right. And so then you add it to the extra layer of, this is where we worship God. This is where we come to be, to escape all the changing and, currents of the world out there that's maddening. And this is supposed to be the still point, that where we can receive nourishment, and that's not safe either. We are still judged for being here, or don't know, I don't know if I can look over at the person who's giving me the sign of peace and like, and see into their heart and wonder, like, do you,
trust that they actually mean it?
Yeah. So that's what we were like, well, we're going to leave for a few weeks and just drive out west, like pack up, and we need to figure this out. And then on top of that, this is when a lot of the Steubenville things started coming to light. And I had just written an article for Crisis about that. And when you write something like that, you start getting a lot, I'm sure, Paul, you've experienced this, a lot of messages out of nowhere from people who want to reach out and tell you their own stories. And so at one point, it was like every night someone's calling me or messaging me out of the blue that I don't even know. Some of them, or sometimes it would be people that I did know and was close to, and they would share experiences that they had. And it's like, I didn't, it's another type of horror to be like, I thought I knew you so well, and I didn't realize that you were suffering this way, or that you had that experience with that priest. And so it was a heavy time for me to both process that, and like I never thought that any institution in the church was perfect, this is a lot.
Yeah. And it feels like an honor and a privilege, and it's humbling when people share those things with you. But you don't walk away from those things unaffected. Like holding that space for other people's stories, it still weighs on you.
Right.
And it still shapes your own, how you see the church and how you see these institutions. Because there's, if what not just this individual person's story is true, if what these 11 people's story is true, and I accept that as true, then what does that say about these people, in this case from Franciscan, who I thought were good people, who I thought had the interest of other people in mind? Like, to accept these stories as true has implications for how you view these things.
Right. And it starts to change your memory of those things, and of those years. Or, for me, it made, like, both in our own church, it started, making me doubt, like, the quality of friendships, and the future of friendships. And looking back at my, my time at Steubenville, which was great, it starts to taint your memories and but anyways, your question was about nature and the difference between, like, so I think when we were just in these wild, big places, I realized, these aren't safe and tame places either. Like when we're in New Mexico, I'm like constantly paranoid that like a mountain lion's just going to come out of nowhere and like eat my child. Like I don't feel safe there either, but it's a different type of safety. And I think I was longing for something else grand and beautiful. And it felt like a balm to me. Like I feel like the best word. I finally on this trip confronted the wounds, and I recognized that all I wanted was to go seek out beauty and pour that beauty into my heart. And I was getting it in that particular way. And other times it's been through the church. It's been in beautiful churches or within the context of the liturgy or all these things. But like at the time, I just needed it directly from creation and not something that was filtered through people, because I was tired of people.
Yeah. There was another point in the article. You were the time that you were on this trip was also at some point the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and you were reflecting on the Litany of the Sacred Heart, specifically on some of the titles of Christ, like Desire of the Everlasting Hills, which is the title of your article. And you said, again, reading from the article, I pondered that last title as we painstakingly threaded our way through boulder fields that seemed to never end. Jesus said the rocks of the Mount of Olives would cry out praise if man was silent. What would the Sandia Mountain say for me? And I loved that as I can't trust people. So maybe the mountains will pray for me. I can trust the mountains.
Yeah. So I had never, that was in June, I guess. And I had never really paid attention to the devotion of the Sacred Heart before. I felt that was really intense, like traditional Catholics do. And whenever I'd see a picture of the Sacred Heart, I'd be like, that's kind of weird. That, like, I read this description, I think it was from Dappled Things, and it was kind of a joke. And they were, I think they're doing an art contest to get better visual art of the Sacred Heart. And I think they used the phrase like Pantene hair Jesus on it. I was like, it's true. Like it's this very romantic, I don't know, Victorian, like weird, I don't know, thing of like bleeding hearts and a Jesus that does not look like anything I would want to be near. But I started in the days leading up to the Solemnity of the Sacred Heart. I think I came across the litany, and I had never seen it before and was really drawn to and kind of mystified by some of the titles. that were given to Jesus's heart. And one of them was desire of the everlasting hills, like he said, and just being among mountains. That struck me as I wondered, like, what does that mean? How can the hills desire something? What does that prayer look like? The surging up, and like they are drawn, even the earth is drawn to Jesus's heart. And where am I in relation to that? Like, can they draw me too?
Yeah, there were several moments, those two moments specifically. You said the word balm. Those feelings you expressed, those felt like balm. There was another moment, and this is a little bit longer of a passage. I want to spend a little bit of time here. This is towards the beginning of the article, as you're leaving for the trip. You said, this is from the article again, a few weeks before we left, we had found ourselves on the receiving end of public derision from someone we trusted, a sweeping judgment that caught us off guard with its willingness to scapegoat, ridicule, and egg on others to do the same. It took place within the context of our church, a community we love dearly and had striven to hold tight to during the pandemic, even as the same fault lines that split the world made their way into the pews. Before we left, we'd come to a fragile place of forgiveness and reconciliation, possible only by grace, I realized in the moment, but it still hurt. Our sense of belonging, of being at rest and at home and safe in this corner of the church, was still shattered. Your experience, and in particular, this feeling of no longer feeling safe in a place that felt safe, and specifically in, not in the church broadly, but safe in my parish, in my home community. Like, it resonated with me profoundly. Again, wanting to avoid the specifics because it's easy to get caught up in the specifics, but focused on the experience and the feelings. I'd worked at my parish in a small town. My town's like 1,200 people. I relocated my whole family here and bought a house here, and my kids go to Catholic school here. And I worked at this parish for almost 8 years. And for a whole number of serious reasons, me and all the ministry staff, we resigned at the same time about 1.5 years ago. And in response to that, my pastor at the time, he publicly shamed us by name and accused us of grave sin by name, without anyone stopping him from doing that. And I'd been transparent with the stuff that wasn't going on, been transparent with the diocese, was friends with a handful of people in the diocese, and nobody protected me. Nobody stopped that from happening. Nobody with any type of authority tried to rectify that or make amends for that happening. Nobody who worked in the diocese went to the bishop and was like, I can't work in an organization that allows people to be treated this way, by pastors using all of their authority to harm people this way. I still lived in this town of 1,200 people. There are only 2 churches in town, the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, the Catholic Church being the main one, right? I lived in town. My house is 3 blocks from the church. My kids go to Catholic school. So all of that stayed the same during and after all of this was happening. For several months, we attended a neighboring parish in a different diocese. And it was really great being an anonymous pew sitter. I could show up, I could sit in the back. Most people didn't know me. I didn't know enough about that particular priest to have any type of judgments. I could just kind of be naive uh, and just show up to mass. After a few months, my pastor, he had resigned due to health issues. And after that, we started attending mass in my home parish again. And we've been attending for just over a year. But there hasn't been any type of reconciliation. And there hasn't been any attempt from anyone with authority to repair the harm that was done. And we recently had a really great conversation with we have a brand new pastor, and it was a really great conversation. And I'm hopeful and excited to get to know this new pastor. But I told him, I still don't feel safe. If it weren't for the constraints of being in a small rural community and living in town and my kids going to the school here, if it weren't for those constraints, I would go someplace else because I don't feel safe in this community anymore. Again, like similar to things you had said, I don't know what the person standing next to me in the pew thinks of me. The pastor said some really terrible things about me. And that was never corrected. This feeling of being at home and being safe is gone. Oh man, where to go from here?
I guess a difference, and I talk about this in my essay, is for us, we did experience, like, the reason we came back, because it would probably be pretty stupid. I don't know. We have churches like 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, it wouldn't have been a good idea for us to stay if certain rights or wrongs weren't righted, and that transgression wasn't named by the offender, and that person did, and I felt did express genuine contrition and sought reconciliation in a way that, like, I think I've told you this before, like, made me believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, because that's not a natural thing for someone who feels so strongly about whatever, especially the issues that were like swirling around then, like, to realize, like, I did this, I handled this so wrong, please forgive me. And to do so publicly, like, to make sure that everyone else knows, like, I was in the wrong. And that didn't take away the source of disagreement, or make things, make everything easy. But that act, which you haven't had, did make the difference and made us think, community is hard, but if the grace is there, then it's possible. And we're gonna keep trying, as long as that good faith is still extended. But if it's not there, then yeah, how do you feel safe in your corner of the church?
Yeah. We're talking about feeling safe in the church. And you had said at the beginning of our conversation before we started recording, it may be important to talk about what we don't mean by safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. So I'll throw it back at you.
I
What
think
don't
about
we mean
this
by safety?
sometimes, like, I think there's a lot of derision about, safe spaces and what that is and isn't. And, do you just mean you'd never want to feel uncomfortable or challenged by something, by an idea you don't like? And I don't think that's what either of us mean, because I think there's a sense in which church and being Catholic shouldn't be safe for us and for a comfortable existence, because if the gospel is a two-edged sword, then it's going to cut at times and it's going to hurt. And if the church, I was thinking about this earlier, like, if the church is a hospital, right? Like, that doesn't mean it's your nice suburban, like, pediatrician's office. It has, like, you go to the ER and you see crazy, ugly things sometimes. And that's just where we all end up sometimes. And that's the world, and that's the church too.
And Francis says we're a field hospital, which means
Yeah.
we're an ER in the middle of a battlefield.
Yeah. And like, even if we're not just like this remote field hospital, even like, you know, the hospital down the street in the middle of like our downtown is there. It's next to our physical church actually, and everyone shows up, you know. And we can't expect our congregation to only look like us and to only think like us and make us feel comfortable. I don't know. Like I feel like when people, you know, start complaining about like, oh, the panhandler, you know, in the back, or, you know, what if a man in a dress shows up? Like, are we going to say, no, this is a safe space? Like, you're not allowed here. These are things
Difference
that
from a
like,
safe space and an echo chamber.
yeah.
There's, I mean, to reiterate, there's a difference between being challenged by the truth of God's revelation and being challenged by the image of God in the people who are around us in our physical, literal community or church building, and the messiness of their lives. Like Pope Francis writes about in Gaudete et Exsultate. He's like, even people whose lives look the most wrecked, like they still bear God's image. God is still working through them in some way, which means we have something. It means we can encounter God in them, and it would be a privilege to encounter God in them. So it's not being challenged by those things. It's safety in the sense of like where I don't know if my dignity is being respected, or I know for sure that it isn't.
Yeah. Or I don't trust that what's being taught to me isn't just a person's, you know, or being like shared among me, like, and even just among peers in the pews, that like the gospel we seem to be living isn't just a personal judgment or a personal opinion of how they live it out in their own lives versus like the actual gospel of Christ. When you start catching that and saying, I don't want my children to be to come away and think that that's Christianity. That's your political opinion, or, you know, that's the way that you've decided things for your family. But when it's covered in the veneer of like, well, no, this is Catholicism. I think that's another aspect of wondering, like, is our spiritual formation safe?
Yeah, if people are presenting things, if people in authority are presenting things, and whether they're pastors or catechists or teachers, saying this is what the church teaches, and it's not what the church teaches. It's being, like you said, being unsafe in what's being taught, and lying about the gospel and lying about the church, even if unintentional, even with entire sincerity and goodwill.
Yeah,
it's still very harmful. Oh man, I have lots of things on my notes.
Yeah.
And where do I want to go next? I'm gonna jump around a little bit. You handed me this article when we visited, because I asked you and your husband, which, looking back, was a pretty personal and challenging question. How do you navigate still being Catholic, knowing that all of this crap in the church is true? And, you know, that's when you handed me.
Yeah, that is a question that, like, you know, so why are you still here? Like,
because not everybody is, and and not as a judgment, because if your dignity has been that profoundly harmed,
Like, I totally understand why you're not here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And maybe not being here is in this moment of your life the healthiest thing for you.
hmm Yeah. So yeah, I kind of jokingly handed you an article, but is your question like, really like how have we at least I navigated remaining? I think like very practically speaking, um, for me, and I draw this out in my essay, it's a lot of it has been seeking out beauty. And I've realized it's a powerful antidote to remaining in a place of bitterness and resentment. Um, just like whatever's that balm, um, whether it's natural beauty like it was for me that summer, or the beauty of friendships, like having families like yours who understand, closer into your circle, um, or books that you've returned to that have always, I feel like, reminded you of the goodness of the faith, or just really distilling down into like what draws me here. If it's Jesus, then what shows me Jesus's face more clearly? Like, and if it's these things that trigger other emotions, like I'm just going to let it go right now and just focus on what is beautiful and soothing in the moment. It's been like art for me. We bought a membership to the Detroit Institute of Arts last year, and just the chance to go on a weekday with a friend. Like, they had a Van Gogh exhibit, and I grabbed someone who I love dearly, and we went, and just being able to sit in front of something that it's kind of like a pilgrimage to just sit in front of a piece of beautiful art that people for years and years and years have come to and sat in front of before, and just like bathed in its beauty. Like, that I just felt is another way to just fill my own heart with goodness, um, and to avoid the temptation of just resentment. Um, I think that's a big thing that has, I don't know, helped me to navigate my place in the church without only feeling like, I don't know, frustrated or upset. And this is not to say that there aren't times like, we powwow with like-minded friends and are just like,
This is everything that's wrong.
I know, like there are moments like that, and then, but you can't live there. I don't want to remain in that place. Because I don't know. And I think also just acknowledging like it's a lonely place to be, um to acknowledge like a certain alienation within a place that's supposed to be your spiritual home, but wanting to stay there. Like, most people would either not feel that, not feel the alienation and not, struggle with this. Or if they do, then they're like, well, goodbye, I'm going to leave. And to try to be in this other space can be very lonely. So I think acknowledging that and trying to fight against the loneliness is another thing.
That temptation you talked about to resentment and bitterness, what I've found navigating that is like, I don't want to be that. I've encountered a lot of bitter Catholics in my life. The world does not need another bitter Catholic. But I mean, there's been times where the thought of not being bitter felt like a betrayal of the truth of my experience. If I'm not angry about this, then somehow I'm betraying what happened to me and saying that it's okay. And acknowledging that at some point over the past year or so was really freeing for me, where like, it's okay for me to be happy and joyful in the church at times. And that isn't a betrayal of the truth of what happened to me and what the things that have happened to other people I care about.
Yeah. I think something, so I ended the article by mentioning how, we came back, we went back to school, we did all these things, and in place of like the mountains that I found giving me solace and consolation, I realized I found the same healing in going to mass at the school mass, and these little kids are saying, like really simple praise and worship songs, and there's just something about their innocence that allowed me to pray, to pray in the liturgy, to pray in the same place, in the same context in the community that I felt wounded in before. But like that these children's prayers were lifting me up in the same way that, the mountains were the desire of the hills. And I don't know, an image I kept having that year was like of handholds, if you're like rock climbing and you grasp onto something. And I started to think of people that way, and people within the same community, right? Like community is this like tricky paradox where it can wound you and it can be like your lifesaver at the same time, right? And I would find people who would just shine out to me as like witnesses of, what's wrong in the church. You see it too, but you have faith. And I don't know how strong my own faith is now, but I'm going to hold on to you. And maybe they didn't even know it, that they were like a tether for me. But finding those people as well. And just praying along with them, or saying, I don't, they're still here, and I don't know what their thought process or, reasoning is, but God, I want to attach myself to that in the moment, because they're still making it work.
Yeah. The feeling of alienation and the feeling of loneliness for me has been lessened by attaching myself to people, but specifically people who also get it. Someone reached out to me, in the past year to share their story of being harmed in the church. And they talked about how they phrased it was, I had really close Catholic friends and I tell them what happened and they didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get how much harm this did. And they had really easy answers to explain it away. Like, priests are just sinners too. This person was just doing his best, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she had said, it's really great to talk with people who get it. And that's something that I found where it's like hanging on to two true things. Like, I love the church. I love the sacraments. I love the teachings of the church and the beauty in the church. And that is true. And what is also true is a profound amount of ugliness and abuse and self-protection and cover-up. And I've been able to give myself permission to hang on to both of those things, which can be very uncomfortable, is very uncomfortable. But I don't have to resolve the tension by denying either of those truths, right? I can still hang on to both of them. Those people hanging on to both of them, that's the community I have found to be the most supportive and the most healing for me to be a part of. The Catholics who get it.
Yeah. Before I forget, I think another practical thing that's kind of helped me shift my mentality of what is my place in the church, and what is when I find myself getting upset of like, the church, that the way the church speaks about like X, Y, or Z, or the church doesn't do this other thing well, or it fails in this way. At some point I realized, like, if I only think in that frame of mind, like it's kind of discounting the fact that through my own baptism, like, I am the church as well, and whatever I do is bringing the church into that space. So like I'm sure we can have a long discussion how the church doesn't speak to like the people, to that community of people who are struggling to hold on to that tension. Like the church doesn't do a great enough job acknowledging that tension. But by you and Dominic, I think, speaking to this and asking these questions, like, you are bringing the church there. And so for me, it's been also, I guess, trying out to live out different aspects of the church's mission in other ways than we'd been used to. So instead of like maybe doing every single thing in our little circle, or in our parish or school, it's been volunteering with Catholic charities and working with like Muslim refugees and knowing like this is the church too, or speaking, like just going out of what we've created and finding other aspects of the church.
I had two really concrete experiences of that a year and a half ago. So it was March when all this happened at my parish. So Easter was just a few weeks after that. And during Holy Week, I had, Christina and I, we decided kind of on a whim. We both really love the ancient homily for Holy Saturday. And there isn't Mass on Holy Saturday. The church doesn't celebrate Mass, just morning prayer. So we're like, let's invite people over. So we invited people in our community over to our house for brunch and morning prayer, and read from the Liturgy of the Hours. And there were like 20 people in our house, 20 adults in our house or more, and at least half that many kids. And I don't have a very big house. We were we filled up both our living room and our dining room, and a couple people brought books, breviary books. Most people just had like the apps on their phone, and we prayed this together. And I love Holy Week liturgies. I absolutely love all of the Holy Week liturgies. Like this past year, we went to my sister and her family are at the Basilica in Grand Rapids, and they do everything for Holy Saturday, all the smells and bells, all the things. And I loved it. It's wonderful. This morning prayer in my dining room with these concrete people, this is the best Holy Week liturgy I've ever experienced. That was like we were being church and celebrating liturgy in the way proper to us as baptized Christians. And God was present in that in a very concrete way. And then the other concrete experience of experiencing the church in a new way was like like several people in my community, like people who live within like, blocks of my house, like literal neighbors, were so incredibly materially supportive of my family during that time. I mean, there was a couple times where there'd just be like an envelope of cash in our mailbox with no name on it. We just received a tremendous amount of support from our community in a way that I had never experienced before. So God was very present in that as well. We're getting to the time of wrapping up. I think I have another question, but before I get there, do you have any thoughts, Dominic?
No, not really. I mean, they come and go throughout the conversation, but there are none really jumping out right now. So carry on with your question.
Yeah. Okay. So to leave listeners with something tangible, or some tangible things. If someone has resonated with the experiences that we've talked about here, and find themselves in a place where they no longer feel safe in the church, you've given some, but what are some other suggestions that you would have for listeners in that experience?
I think just starting off with acknowledging, I think we've talked about acknowledging the wound and the reason for experiencing that that hurt and that lack of safety, and not dismissing it for yourself or discounting seriousness goes a long way. And if you have people that get it, like you said, and can affirm for you, like, no, that was serious, that's, you are right and justified in feeling this way, I think is a huge like relief, to be able to share that burden with somebody who understands. For me, it's been a lot of soul searching of, why am I here, and do I believe that Jesus is who he says he is? And if he is, then do I trust that he still comes to me through the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, through the church that he gave us? Like, despite all this, like, no one's denying that this mess is all around and really bad and all this, like, do I still believe that Jesus is at the center? And that's what really moved me about the Litany of the Sacred Heart, because the titles that they give him are all about, they're all about all the, like, naming him as the center of all of our desires, like our desires for reconciliation, for justice, for peace and love and virtue. It's his heart that pulls all of that into one place. And I knew that place culminates in the liturgy. And so that's what kept me going. But if a person can't get there, for whatever reasons, especially I think trauma, if they can't physically be in the church, like, that's okay. I know you and I have talked about, I think it's the Archdiocese of Minneapolis, St. Paul somewhere, who started a ministry to bring the Eucharist to people who've been abused within the church. And so it's a burden and a hurdle for them to get to Mass, but Jesus will come to them, and there are people willing to bring Jesus to them. I think that's really beautiful.
The church recognizes, like, trauma is a legitimate reason to miss Mass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
No, I guess so. I mean, I wasn't there, but going through and just wrestling in my mind and confirming for myself, like, I'm here because of Jesus, and that altar is where he comes, and I want to be there. Like, having that shift in my vision, like, it doesn't mean I don't see, or I don't choose to see, the bad things as well, but I guess trying to keep my vision focused on that truth, as opposed to just filled with the things that would just make me resentful and want to leave, has kept me here.
Yeah. That joy and happiness and peace aren't a betrayal of the harm that's happened.
Right. Yeah. And remaining isn't a betrayal. But I totally get, like, when people will say, well, don't leave because of the Eucharist, like, that can really, that doesn't
dismissive.
always hit. Yeah. That most of the times I hear that, I kind of cringe, and I was like, that's, I think you have to acknowledge that it doesn't always resonate with people in the moment. But.
Yeah. Unless the harm has been fully acknowledged, that statement comes off as dismissive. Sure.
Or it's a little like, people telling someone in an abusive marriage, like, well, don't leave because of the kids, or, these things, like, that's true, but this is also harming me by staying. I think we need to be careful with how we phrase that.
Yeah. And I think it's true too. Like people are free to go where it's safe. Like, if going to Mass at a different parish or a different diocese feels safer, go.
That's okay. Good for you. Yeah.
I think too, I would add that in the Gospels, Jesus explicitly identifies himself with those who are wounded and the marginalized, even the ones who are wounded and marginalized by the religious leaders. So even if someone was harmed by someone like a priest who sacramentally represents Christ, maybe even especially if they've been harmed by someone who sacramentally represents Christ, Christ is still on the side of the person who's been harmed and been marginalized. Like, Christ is present with the wounded and in the woundedness in a very attentive way. Oh man, that was a lot. That was a fantastic conversation. Liz, thank you so much. Thank you for this article. I really hope that the link is out online.
I do too. Otherwise, we'll just do like old school sharing. Like, I'll take a picture and like post.
Well, like I said right before
before
we started recording, for those who haven't yet read it, I skimmed it briefly, and just skimming it was beautiful. And like I said, you got a beautiful turn of phrase. It's not only a beautiful reflection, but it's also just a delight to read. So I hope people also get a chance to score a copy and enjoy it for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you can buy the printed magazine.
You could. Yeah.
It's the Pentecost edition of Dappled Things.
I get no royalties, but go buy it if you
want. Liz, where can people find you and follow your work?
I guess Twitter is probably the best way for who knows how long until that crashes and burns. But I'm Liz E. Hansen. That's LIZEEHANSEN. I was trying to like explain the name Hansen to someone recently because she couldn't like comprehend it. I don't know. And I wanted to say Hansen, like the boy band, but it's not. It's not SON. It's SEN. So not even that really helped. But
awesome. Dominic, do you want to take us out?
Sure thing. So hey friends, if you enjoyed this show, please hit that like button because it's going to help YouTube promote this conversation so that more people can discover what Liz has been talking about, what she's working on. And of course, it helps us every time we put out a new show to reach more people who are like you and I and looking for this sort of thing. So if you are enjoying these conversations, we'd love to meet you and hang out with you.
If you like the content that you're hearing in this podcast and you want to go deeper, you can check out Father's Heart Academy. We are building a community, have built a community for people who are wanting a more compelling church, a more compelling gospel. Like, and by that, I mean like a place that holds the tension, both in the experiences that we've had of feeling harmed in the church and a place that holds the intellectual tension of some of the mysteries of the faith that are really difficult to reconcile and isn't afraid of people asking questions within that tension and isn't afraid to not have like easy, ready answers to those, to just kind of wait in the question. So if you're interested in a community like that, check out Father's Heart Academy.
I'm convinced that that's the mark of a mature, discerning faith, like the Holy Father calls for, is an ability to recognize that where there are problems that seem unsolvable, to just sit with them and hold both sides. And more often than not, we end up having to hold both sides on many issues. And it's the compulsive need for certainty and for a way too definite answer and a black and white, clarity that can end up getting us into all sorts of trouble and scrupulosity. And I'm just wonderfully proud of the amazing members of our Smart Catholics community who are part of the Father's Heart Academy, who are seeking these kinds of conversations in that spirit of gentility. And occasionally we'll get these people who come in and they're lambasting things and shotgunning the walls. And so we just listen to them for a hot minute and then we boot them if they aren't interested in paying attention. Because we're building a particular kind of culture, and Paul's just doing this incredible work to provide guidance. So members of the Academy do get special access and benefits to Paul and the work he's doing. You can meet with him regularly, discuss recent podcasts or events in the church. There are seminars and workshops on specific topics and magisterial documents.
And The homepage for this podcast is popefrancisgeneration.com. You can contact me there. And then for Father's Heart Academy, that's fathersheartacademy.com. And also check out Smart Catholics.
So, till next time, friends, say a short prayer for yourself and for us. And remember, don't be afraid to ask questions. Doubts can be a sign that we want to know God better and more deeply. God bless you.